As promised, in studio, we've flown him in at huge expense from Washington, D.C., back to his own home parish, for it all started here at RedFM for the one and only Brian O'Donovan of RTE, the American correspondent who's just published his book, 4 Years in the Cauldron. He joins me in studio. Good morning.
Good morning, Neil. Great to be here.
Do you recognise everything around you?
Absolutely, bringing me back. I started here 20 years ago, just when the station launched. I started as a weekend newsreader.
Nothing changes, I suppose? It's still the same?
It's quite similar, yeah, absolutely. It's good to be back. It's nice.
It must be amazing, though, coming back somewhere 20 years later, and thinking, wow, all I've done, where I've been, places I've seen, and it all started here.
It did, and I remember the excitement because RedFM launched. It was a news station, and if anybody's ever worked in a new startup company, there's a great buzz and a great excitement. We were all so young, we were all so enthusiastic, and it was such an enjoyable time. I had such fond memories, and I started working weekends while still in college in Dublin. I was doing communications in DCU, and I would come down and do my Saturday and Sunday news reading shift. And I always tell the story that when RedFM launched, at that point, I knew I wanted to work in media, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do in media. And they advertised for newsreaders and they advertised for DJs. And I applied for both. And Lana O'Connor called me in for a newsreader interview. I never got the DJ interview, and that is how I embarked on the news.
Well, I can understand. I mean, you need to have the smarts, but you certainly have the voice for newsreading. So that's one of the reasons why you would have been picked. But it's an amazing book, and it's full of stories and anecdotes. And for me, it struck me as amazing the pace at which, because we just see your pieces to camera and we think everything is kind of rosy in the garden, but you literally can be anywhere at any time. But can I ask you about the whole move itself? Because you have a young family, your wife Joanna and the kids. Like, did you think about that, uprooting and going very closely?
We were talking about that only recently. It was probably this time 4 years ago that the job was coming up, and that we had the big conversation with my wife. Now, my wife is incredibly enthusiastic about travel. She's far more adventurous and has a better travel bug than I. So when I suggested even going for the job in the first place, she said 100% go for it. I think it'll be great. We felt the kids were young enough. Lucy and Erin, when we went out, were only kind of 8 and 4, so they weren't in that teenage year where we'd be uprooting them from the Leaving Cert or from secondary school or anything. We kind of felt they were young enough that we could do it.
Did you have a vote on it? Like, did the kids get a vote?
Nah, they were of an age where we pretty much told them, I suppose, but they were excited too. I have a brother who lives in Philadelphia, which isn't too far from Washington. He has 3 young boys, cousins similar ages to the girls, so they were excited about living near family over there, which was great.
Yeah. And you were saying it's only for 4 years.
Yes. And that's the part of the thing. People say, will you miss it? And of course I'll miss it, and I'll miss the rush and I'll miss the buzz, but it is a 4-year posting, and that's always what we viewed it as.
And Katrina Perry was there for you, she said similar,
Exactly. And it's been a posting that is 4 years. I think it's a good length. It gives you this buzz, it gives you this rush. You get to cover these massive stories, but it's a moment in time, and then it's wonderful to be able to publish a book and look back on it all and just to have it all encapsulated in the pages, a sort of almost like a souvenir or a memoir of what was really an amazing time and a wonderful time for journalism.
Talk about 4 years in the cauldron. I mean, you had Trump, you had McGregor and all of his antics, you had the upside of things like the Oscars, and you covered that and the St. Patrick's Day parades and stuff, but you had the building the wall, you had Brexit, you had, as I say, Trump, Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, you had the election, you had COVID hit. Talk me through all of that. Do any stand out?
Well, what I'd say, when you mention all of those things, what dominated for a lot of the time was all of those things being viewed through Donald Trump's handling. Donald Trump loomed large over everything for the 3 years of my 4 years, because you talk about COVID. It became, well, how did he deal with COVID? And then, of course, you had all the controversy about him suggesting you would ingest disinfectants.
You talk about that because you were there when this was happening.
Yeah,
and he was talking about the disinfectant. And then the companies had to come out the next day and say, please do not swallow bleach.
And what we see now, Neil, to this very day, is people still doubting the vaccine in America, a huge level of vaccine hesitancy. But many of those same people are quite willing to take things like horse dewormer tablets or hydroxychloroquine or whatever else you're having, but they won't trust a trusted vaccine. And I think it speaks to a level of distrust, a level of disunity, and a level of fracture really in the US that has existed post-Trump. Joe Biden has not been able to heal that, I don't believe, in any great way. It's still quite a divided nation. But yeah, looking back over the 4 years, incredibly busy, but a lot of it, as I say, those big stories handled through the prism of Donald Trump. He dominated all. He loomed large over everything, and he dominated the news, and he certainly dominated also, my job there.
Without a doubt, because also it all culminated then with Trump ending, not getting re-elected, and the riots and march on the Capitol.
Yes, and if you look at 2020 as a year, I had an idea of what that would be. It would be an election year, it would be busy, and in the January, it looked like Donald Trump had a good chance of getting back in. If you recall, the Democrats were kind of tearing each other apart. Joe Biden was having terrible primaries. He was losing all the early primaries. It didn't look like the Democrats were coming up with a good candidate. The economy was doing very, very well. Yeah. Everything was looking very, very good. And then the coronavirus hit.
And you say in the book, the quote here is a country, actually, I think you actually say that if it hadn't been for COVID, I don't have the exact words, so correct me. If it hadn't been for COVID, he probably would have been re-elected.
He probably would have. I don't want to say definitively. We can never say that definitively, but I think he probably did a very good chance. And I spoke to some of his key people, his former chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney. He said, yeah, that January, that February, they were preparing it. Because remember what Donald Trump's strengths was the rally. And going out and rallying the troops and holding these big speeches and these big campaign events. That was all gone. That got locked down with COVID. His other big strength was the economy. All of a sudden, he had to tell every business to close. And as we know, he railed against that. And he did not want people close their businesses. He didn't want churches to be closed. He didn't want people to wear masks. So the whole thing frustrated him. I also think the COVID year highlighted for people the differences in America when it comes to that federal system of the states. The states have all the power. It's up to Florida to close their schools. It's up to Washington to close the shops. It's not up to him. And that drove him mad. He did not like losing the power and not having the control to open things or close things as he saw fit.
Yeah, because clearly you would have been in and out of the White House and also a lot of the other buildings, but in and out of the White House, in and out of the Oval Office. Clearly you'd have to have security passes and things for that. What's that like?
Well, it changed with COVID. So initially, I was pleasantly surprised to see the level of access both on Capitol Hill and both in the White House. As a journalist, you are entitled to go into both. The Capitol Hill access I have always found fascinating. It is, and other people would comment on this, a very, very open building where people can go in, even tourists. You get in quite easily and you can get around very easily.
And so did rioters.
I was just going to say, far easier than like the likes of Leinster House. Not anymore. That has definitely been clamped down post.
But you know, like say for instance, in the White House and moving around the White House and moving around the Oval Office as being an Irish television journalist, I would say you're treated probably better. Are you being Irish?
It helps. So you get the access, and I know some people roll their eyes and they're a bit glib about it, but every St. Patrick's Day, that presentation of the Bowl of Shamrock, that is a really genuinely important big diplomatic event for Ireland. It's the envy of many other small countries, and it's wonderful to be the Irish journalist because we ride on those coattails and we're brought to all those events as a result of that. The Irish card has most definitely helped. I've been at events with Speaker of the House, I've been at events with the Chief of Staff of the White House, I've been at events with the President because it was a part of an Irish delegation and an Irish event, so that has most definitely helped. The other thing I would say about the Trump White House, and he came in for a lot of criticism because, you know, he got rid of that daily press briefing and he didn't do a lot of formal press conferences, and like everything with the Trump presidency, there was an informality, there was an upending of the norms, but what he loved to do, Neil, was what we call chopper talk, which is where he'd walk out of the door of the Oval Office across the South Lawn of the White House to get onto his military Marine One helicopter to take him to wherever he was going, and he would stop and he would talk to the media and he would take the time and walk up and down the media line and speak to everybody. I got access to him that way. He would speak to me, so that gave a level of access.
He knew you were Irish, and he knew
not necessarily, but I would shout Irish related questions. There's a piece in the book where I said I'd been down to the White House a few times and I'd failed to get his attention because of all the shouting and the roaring of the helicopter engines, and my wife Joanna said, she said, why don't you try shouting out the word Doonbeg? You might catch his attention. And it did, and it worked. And
what happened when you shouted Doonbeg?
And Doonbeg was in the news at the time. You may recall, as with everything but Donald Trump, there was controversy over where he'd meet Leo Varadkar. Where would he stay? Would he spend US taxpayers' money on one of his own resorts when he was going to visit Ireland? So I shouted out Doonbeg. He heard it. He came over, asked him a few questions about his plans to come to Ireland. So got the interview with the guy. So it worked.
If you ever want to know how to do things right, ask your wife then.
Absolutely. That is a lesson for us all, Neil.
I mean,
in general.
when you're there and you're rearing two small children and you're living in Washington, you had to find somewhere to live. They had to find school. How difficult was that? Because you could be anywhere at any time.
Yeah, and people and friends had sort of advised us to find a community that had good neighbours, good supports, good friends around, because I would be away a lot, and that was the truth for the last 4 years. Lots of last minute breaking stories where you have to leave. We found a wonderful community in the suburbs of Washington, a good school for the girls, made some wonderful neighbours and friends, and that was key, particularly for my wife, because she was on her own when I was off dispatched doing a story, as I say, many times at last minute. So that was important, and we made fabulous friends in the US, and we will miss them. That is one of the things we will miss.
And did you always feel safe for, say, you and your family? Because you spoke about it. I mean, you went to a gun show, for instance. You talk about that in the book. Like many of us would go into a record shop or buying a CD or a book. guns, it's God and guns.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like it's two complete diverse things when you say God and guns.
And they link them, and this conservative view, and often the gun rights campaigners would say it's our God-given right to bear arms, this right to bear arms, that's enshrined in their constitution, and they sort of link it to religion. And
but you went and you registered at the door to go in there, and for weeks afterwards you're getting special offers on guns and bullets by email.
Absolutely. We went to this shooting range, this gun show, and when we'd registered, so I would get these text messages in all capital letters, special offers, buy your Valentine's a special gift this Valentine's Day, get her a gun, this sort of thing.
Crikey.
Yeah, no, it was unbelievable, and these text messages would come through thick and fast, and of course you'd say, well, why did you just unsubscribe, which I could have, but I was fascinated by it, and I felt with these text messages, they became more frequent and almost more exclamation marks and capital letters the closer we got to the election. And there was this sense that Joe Biden was going to take away your guns. And that was one of Donald Trump's catchcalls, saying, I'll protect your Second Amendment right to bear arms. He'll take away your guns. And there was this belief in the run-up to the election. And actually gun sales increased in America in the run-up to the election, among this sense that if the Democrats got in, they'd change gun right laws.
So much happened in those 4 years. I mean, we had the, murder of Jason Corbett, more to the point, the Tom and Molly Martin's trial. That was on the other coast, wasn't it?
No, that was on the same coast. It was North Carolina. It was about a 6-hour drive.
Oh, okay.
But it was a reminder, and that was a case of...
that could have gone on forever.
Absolutely, yes. And what that was for me was the reminder that the Washington correspondent of RTE is not just the White House or Capitol Hill. It's also, and what I would say, a very, very important part of the role, issues that affect Irish people. There was an Irish man who had been murdered. There was a family very, very upset, of course, back home in Ireland. And it was very, very important that we cover that trial and all those proceedings. And there were other incidents of assaults or people who would fall off a bike or fall off a cliff or get hurt or whatever. And I think that was a key part of the Washington correspondency of RTE, that you were there to cover those big issues.
But you have to stay impartial, do you?
Oh, 100%. You have to. I mean, but particularly with any story like that, I feel when it's legal or a court, you are constrained by those sort of things. In the wider political world, people say to me, oh, you saw all this Donald Trump stuff. And, the job of the journalist is to be fair, impartial and balanced, and the best way to do that, I have always thought, is to present the facts. And that really came into it.
But you would have an opinion on all of those.
Yeah, and I mean, particularly with Donald Trump, I felt there was, some people would say, the media gave him an easy ride, or you went along with a lot of the stuff he was coming out with. I mean, that really changed, though, Neil, towards the end, when he started telling lies that the election was stolen. Everybody just started calling him on that, except conservative right-wing media and his support base. But the larger, wider media...
But does RTE call out enough like that?
I would say we did, yeah. I think we are our main focus of lines, would say, which is not, he is making these false claims about an election was stolen. I was always very keen to highlight that the courts, the Attorney General, his own officials, everybody said this election wasn't stolen, but still he persisted with it. And worryingly, Neil, he persists with it to this day. He had a rally last week and it was the same words again.
But that just means that he's gearing up for...
He absolutely is.
As he would say, taking out Sleepy Joe next time.
Yeah. And I mean, will he do it? I don't know. It's still 3 years away. He's certainly gearing up for it. He still has a huge support base. And people always ask me why. Why is he so popular? And I speak to lots of people for the book, and they told me the most fascinating stories for different reasons. He appealed to different people for different reasons. Maybe you were a wealthy businessman and he cut your taxes. Maybe you had very conservative views about guns or abortion and he ticked those boxes. Also, a lot of people liked that he was the outsider. He was not a politician. He came from the outside. He wanted to drain the swamp, change the Washington establishment, and he said, I'm this billionaire businessman who has done it all in the business world, and I'm going to run the country in the same way.
Yeah, but didn't he create a part of the book you talk about a melting pot of cultures? Didn't he create that? Or he certainly raised the temperature on that melting pot of cultures that don't seem to get along, that led to the death and the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. You were there through all of that.
The issue with Donald Trump was that it was a politics of division, and they were divisions that he stoked. Everything. Look at the Black Lives Matter movement. Rather than focusing on systemic racism or problems with the police force, he focused on the negative aspects, the looting, the burning, the rioting, that side of the protest movement, and said to his base, if the Democrats get elected, it'll be chaos and anarchy on the streets. You have to keep me in power. I'm the president of law and order. The coronavirus was divisive because he would focus in on the Democrat-run cities and states that had mask mandates and that had closed businesses, and he'd say, if you elect the Democrats, they'll shut everything down. I'm the guy that'll keep everything open. So everything along the line, and you mentioned immigrants there, remember his platform. It was divisive, but remember his platform when he launched his campaign the first day, he spoke about the building the wall and keeping out immigrants. And that was his policy. That was his politics of division. It worked to a point, but I think what happened in the coronavirus year was that politics didn't work, and that old Donald Trump tactic of I will divide, I will conquer, I'll blame everybody else. It's not my fault. It's what he used to call it the China flu or the China virus or the Kung flu. It's their fault. That didn't wash this time, and people weren't happy with him.
Yeah, but you look at Biden now, and it can be quite alarming watching him. His lack of his lack of recall and his memory losses. You know, that's a worry, isn't it?
What I look at Biden as a campaigner, everybody knows he was never the best speech maker. He was never the best interviewee.
He gets confused.
Yeah, that wasn't his strong point. I think during bizarrely during the virus, it sort of almost suited him in one sense, because as a campaigner, that would not have been his strong suit. Holding a big rally or addressing a big crowd, that all disappeared, of course, in the virus. Now, Donald Trump tried to persist with his rallies, Joe Biden less so there was less public events. What Joe Biden brought to the American people, I think, was a wonderful sense of empathy. He came across as someone who was knowledgeable about world affairs, compassionate and cared. What has happened, unfortunately, for Joe Biden, I think, in recent weeks is that some of those views have been upended. His Afghanistan withdrawal did not go well. I think people were taken aback by that. They kind of said, well, hang on, I thought you were the guy that was meant to understand how foreign affairs worked, or you were the guy that was meant to understand human suffering and the need to help these poor people in Afghanistan. So he came in for a lot of criticism there. He's only 9 months in the job. I would say it was a kind of a very good first 6 months. Definitely the last 3 months have challenged him. Virus is still a big problem in the US. Remember, we've very low vaccination rates. He has some big challenges ahead of him.
But they're opening, aren't they? November 8th, I believe.
Yes, good news for the Irish people who have not been able to travel home, or rather not been able to visit family and friends in the US. They will be able to do so from November 8th. For me personally, when I came home last week, it was the first time in 2.5 years. We could always have come to Ireland, but we wouldn't have been allowed back in. So it's a good time to open, I think, again. It'll be good for Christmas. It'll be coming up to the Thanksgiving season in the US, so I think a lot of people will be excited, because that was a long travel ban.
Are you finished now?
No, I finish at the end of this year, so December, so I still have a few weeks left to go.
And have you got other irons in the fire, a different department?
We will go back to the RTE newsroom. It'll probably be a Dublin-based role. I just don't know what it will be yet. You're guaranteed a job in the RTE newsroom after your stint. I'm just not sure what it is. So conversations to be had with the bosses.
One thing I learned from the book is that we get value for money from you. Big time, because at one stage you were on the phone to me. That's a funny story. I was chatting with you on the air. You're in the back of a taxi in Washington, and there's a big row going on in the taxi.
So what I was talking to you at the time about actually was it was inauguration day. It was the morning of Joe Biden's inauguration, and Washington was like I had never seen it before. So we were only 2 weeks after the storming of the Capitol, so there was a huge security presence in Washington, D.C. Every road was closed with an armed military roadblock, military trucks. It was like a war zone. I'm on the phone to you, informing the good listeners of Cork, and my cameraman is next to me having this unmerciful row with our taxi driver, who keeps telling us I can't drive down that street, it's blocked. And we said, no, we have media passes, we can get in. We hoped. We weren't 100% sure if we would get in, to be honest. So I'm raising the volume of my voice while talking on the phone to you, in the hope that the listeners at home won't hear my cameraman arguing with the taxi driver.
Because there's always a bit of blagging, isn't there? There was a cop then who literally didn't want you to be where you were, but you were live on television, on camera. I don't know, it was 6, 1 or 9 o'clock, whichever. And he eventually just gets so fed up of you being where you shouldn't be, he says, that he pushes the camera over.
That was the night that Donald Trump had been diagnosed with the coronavirus himself, just the night before, and we didn't know at the time, but his condition had really deteriorated that day. We were reporting into the 9 o'clock news. He had gotten very sick, as people will recall. He had to be taken to hospital, and they were bringing in the helicopter to take him to hospital. We were on the lawn in front of the White House, and this very irate security guard came and started shouting at us to move. I couldn't stop because I'd already started my live report, but towards the end of it, he caught the camera, shoved it out of the way, and it looked crazy on air. People were wondering what on earth had gone wrong.
What did they say? Oh, we seem to have lost
technical problems there, sorry about that. And nobody knew, so I was getting calls from the newsroom, are you okay? People on Twitter were saying, I don't know what happened, and in my head it was like, I don't know what happened either. We didn't understand.
Can you not put up a sign saying I'm Irish? Stick it on top of the camera. Because they love, even Americans love to be Irish Americans. You probably got that all the time. Oh, I'm Irish, or my generations back are Irish.
Absolutely, you got that all the time. It opened a lot of doors. I used to find at a Trump rally where maybe the media weren't getting a great time off people, maybe they were anti-CNN or they were anti this station or that station. When I would go up to talk to the Trump supporters, they were always perfectly nice to me, because Ireland had helped open a few doors.
Would you like to have had a one-on-one with them?
With Trump, absolutely. I did many years ago.
You did in Joburg, didn't you?
And I outlined it in the book. That was a kind of a business interview for when I was the TV3 finance correspondent. And
his life's a TV show, isn't it?
Yes. And actually, Leo Varadkar, I interviewed him for the book, and he described meeting Donald Trump in the Oval Office like being a guest on a talk show.
A talk show, yeah.
Yeah. So look, a very interesting guy to interview, to meet. Tall man, big physical presence, both physically and in the room. You know, he is the one commanding all the attention.
Well, would you you're not there anymore. Would you call him a chancer now? You probably couldn't have at the time. Or you think there was?
I would never use the word chancer, Neil. He appealed to a huge swathe of the American public. He ticked an awful lot of boxes. And what I will say about him, whatever else Europeans, Irish people may think about him looking in, when he did some of the controversial things, that is what he said he was going to do. He said he was going to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. He said he was going to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. He kept the promises. He said he was going to do it. A lot of people might not have liked what he did, but this was the pledge that he made, and he stuck with it.
What about family life and time off and holiday? Oh, incidentally, did you get to the Old Ebbitt Grill?
I did, yes. Thank you for the recommendation. It's really good.
Did you like it?
Very nice.
Did you get a steak in there?
Yeah, it's really tasty. And that's a beautiful, old, sort of historic place that the lobbyists would go.
So I told you that. So that's where you want to go if you want to pick up the story. See all the lobbyists working and the politicians.
No, it's a wonderful restaurant and a real institution in Washington, so we went there.
So did you get down to Florida for a week or 10 days with the family?
Yeah, we used to take trips, but unfortunately, it's outlined in the book. Some of those trips used to be interrupted with news stories. Right. I was in South Carolina at a beach one time with the girls around the time George Floyd was killed, so that changed everything. I ended up having to do a report, kind of suit on the top half of me, shorts on the bottom half of me, hoping people wouldn't realise, oh my God, where's your man? And then obviously the holiday to be kind of cut short. And
because if you're doing Morning Ireland, or even if you're doing, say Claire Byrne or whatever, there's no sleep for you then, because that's 3 and 4 in the morning. Yes.
So what happens is the time differences have their, I suppose, advantages and disadvantages. The last television report obviously is the 9 o'clock news at night, which is only 4
That's
p.m.
easy enough, though.
So that's nice. But where you can get caught is at the other side. Morning Ireland is usually pre-recorded around 1 a.m. But I would say that is not that. You don't always do that. That's just during the busy times. And you don't mind then, because it's a busy story, it's big, you want to be across it and you want to be all over it.
Okay, in the postscript, just finally, you call it a country of gun violence and racism. That's not your full summing up of America, though, is it?
No, I mean, what I would look back on, though, is a divided country where everything became a fight. Even wearing a mask, it came down to where you lived and which state you were from and which political party you supported. I think there was a belief that Joe Biden would come in and heal those divisions. Some of them, he certainly made the speeches in his inauguration saying, this is the time to come together, this is the time for healing, this is the time for unity. We haven't seen that yet. Joe Biden's having real problems getting his legislation through. Not just because of divisions within the Republican Party, but divisions within his own party, the Democrats. There's divisions there. Very divided country right now. And I was very interested, I thought, to listen. I don't know if you heard his speech last month. George W. Bush gave a very interesting speech on this 20th anniversary of September 11th. And he spoke about how America was in this time of crisis after September 11th, the worst thing that had probably ever happened to the country. But they came together, this unity, this unified message. He said, I'm not seeing that now, but I guess contained within that is a message of hope that even in the worst of times, America can come together. It is the most amazing country, the most amazing people, but there are certainly divisions and issues there right now.
They're in a recession now. I don't know whether they know it or not, but things that we're better off in Europe now, and we never would have said that about America.
Yeah, and I think the vaccine rollout...
We're envious.
And the vaccine rollout has fascinated me, that America was... kind of the pity of the world during the virus, because the infection rates were the highest in the world. They got the vaccine so early on, they were sort of the envy of the world, but now there's huge vaccine hesitancy there, so it kind of keeps chopping and changing in terms of how America's dealing with this.
And if there was one story, and I don't mean it to come across as sounding glib or anything, and it's not a top 20 in any way, shape, or form, but if there was one that stood out in the 4 years, what was it?
I come back to something actually we've already touched on here, and it was that day that Donald Trump was taken to hospital, and it wasn't necessarily the security guard pushing over the camera, but for me was the big reeling in the years moment. There we were outside the White House. This president, who was in his 70s, had contracted a deadly virus that was killing people and needed to be airlifted to hospital. That to me was one of those wow moments, and I remember it was a beautiful sunny evening in Washington. The sun was setting, everything was bathed in this golden light, and all these tourists and people just stopped and watched this helicopter being lifted off into the air, taking the president to hospital. And I stopped at them and spoke to them, and there was people who loved him, there was people who hated him, but on that evening Washington was united, because I think everybody was concerned whether you loved him or hate him. And nobody wants to see anybody going to hospital.
Yeah.
And then of course what unfolded the following few days was unbelievable scenes outside the hospital. His supporters were there, they were driving up and down in their pickup trucks, waving their flags. He came out then in a car, of course, and waved at them. That to me was one of those big standout moments in what was 4 years of reeling in the years moments, if you will. That's definitely one that stands out.
That's the one. And you called that in live, I see in the book as well. So that was one of those ones where you called the newsroom they knew nothing about it, get me on live moments, like the stuff we see on TV.
Absolutely. It was just unfolding. And think about the twist that was. Here was a man who had spent a year kind of railing against the coronavirus and doing everything he wanted to not talk about it and not look at it and not deal with it. And then he got it himself.
Yeah. But he did have...
and used it, Neil, of course, in his campaigns, then saying, I'm Superman. I came through it,
But you say in the book, yeah, sure, but you had the best medical help in the world.
Absolutely. You're not comparing like with like. And of course, he would say to his supporters, don't be scared of it. It's no big deal. And said, well, that's fine for you to say. You got the best
because when one of the girls fell in the playground, gashed her forehead, I think, you were told, do not turn up at a hospital.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They will fleece you if you do.
Yeah.
You have to call an insurance company?
You do. The medical system there, everybody warned us, do not turn up at a random emergency room. Call the insurance company first, and they'll tell you where to go, because if you just turn up at any hospital, you'll get whacked with a huge bill of thousands of dollars. So it's a tricky system over there, and a difficult system for people to navigate. And again, on an overall assessment of America, the social issues, there's the cost of healthcare, the cost of education. A wonderful country, I think, but if you are down on your luck, and if you don't have a lot of money, and if you're behind for whatever reason, it can be a difficult country to live in, I think.
To say the least.
Yeah.
To say the least.
Yeah.
So you're back for the last few weeks, I suppose. Yes. And then back to Ireland in January, on to the next chapter of your life.
Absolutely.
Good luck with it.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much for having me on.
Delighted that you got to come back in. Happy memories from 20 years ago.
Would you like me to read a bulletin while I'm here? Back for old time's sake.
I think that would be a terrific idea. Go talk to the lads.
I will.
That would be terrific, as long as RT don't sack you or give you a red card.
Exactly.
Anyway, Brian O'Donovan's 4 Years in the Cauldron. Sign that before you go away. Would it be an honour for me if you signed the book? My notes are all over it. I hope you don't mind. But great to see you. The book's available in all good bookshops, and it's great to have you in studio. The one and only Brian O'Donovan, 4 Years in the Cauldron, telling the extraordinary story of America in crisis. And it covers everything. And it's great too, because a lot of social aspects of your life and the family, and that it's not always a walk in the park, and it's not all glamour and glitz.
Yeah.
It's tough too. Well done. Thank you, Brian. Lines open at 1-850 104 106. Brian O'Donovan, 4 Years in the Cauldron. Pick it up. Make a great Christmas gift as well, lads. The timing's excellent.
The Neil Prendeville Show.